So the big day today is such I'd say today is one of the more exciting days in the world of AI. Lots of models landing, lots of advancements happening, and in July, lots of things are going on also in the MCP or Okta space, where we're having a lot of changes to the MCP specifications. One of the biggest changes coming out that I'm super excited about is something called Enterprise Managed Authentication, Authorization. And Aaron and Vijay on the two teams and they have been working a lot in this space. Aaron is the director of identity standards at Okta. He's a maintainer of OAuth.net, authored OAuth tools, simplified, and has done a lot of the spec development in the OAuth landscape, and so in one of the leaders in the space. Vijay on my team here is one of the co-founders of Mint. He's been driving all the technical implementations of MCPs, and so figuring out the auth story for gateways and infrastructure for AI. Aaron and Vijay, I'd love to get you guys to introduce yourself and go there. Aaron, and go first.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be here. Nice to meet you both. I am Aaron Parecki, Director of Identity Standards at Okta, and I have been working in the OAuth space for a very long time now. I've been involved in the IETF OAuth working group for a number of years, working on several different things there, OAuth 2.1, OAuth for browser-based apps, and then more recently been getting into the MCP community, where I've helped drive some of the OAuth work going on there, and that's involved creating a couple of newer docs, or at least progressing some newer docs in the OAuth working group to tackle some of the more specific problems to how the MCP architecture works. And so it's been a lot of fun to work with everybody in those communities on all this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, great to meet you, Aaron. My name is Vijay. I'm one of the co-founders of Mint. And yeah, I've just been trying to figure out how to put all these pieces together, especially in the authorization space, since authorization is such a critical piece of data access for AI agents. And so just happy to be a part of making these pieces all fit together.
I'm glad to have both of you here. Also, like for all the people attending the webinar, that see many people joining right now, if you'd like to introduce yourself and post messages in the webinar chat, we will be answering questions live in the chat as we go. Make sure that you select to post to everyone so that everyone can see the questions as well there. So please do that. So I'm gonna start with a question on my end. So maybe for Aaron, when did you start working on XAA, and what motivated you for you to start looking into this? And what does XAA actually stand for there?
Yeah. So XAA, cross-app access. The name has gone through a couple of journeys over the years, but this was we actually originally started working on this before MCP, before the whole AI craze really took off. And it's interesting that it's not a problem that's actually unique to MCP. It's a problem just about general application access in the enterprise. Essentially, the way we were thinking about it was. This was, I think it was like almost 2.5 years ago, possibly almost 3 years ago now, that we actually, started the initial sketches and brainstorming on this. But in the enterprise, like, it's very common now that we all understand that apps need to be under single sign-on. That is no longer like a novel thing that we have to convince people they should be doing, right? Everyone knows we shouldn't have unique passwords for every person for every app. And the idea with cross-app access is that single sign-on relationship should be extended to API access between these applications. And this is the problem that we identified, was that these applications did want API access between them, but that access was happening directly, which means it's not actually visible to the IDP, and it's sometimes not even visible to the admin of the enterprise at all. And visibility is one thing, control is a whole another thing. So if you can't see it, you can't control it. So we wanted a way to bring that access between applications into the control of the enterprise admin. And what I mean by access between applications is, again, not unique to MCP, but MCP is certainly one example of it. Even if you just take the simple example of, like, you drop a link to a Jira ticket into a Slack wants to preview that message, and it'll actually prompt you like, hey, connect your Jira account so that we can preview this message, right? That's the cross-app access I'm talking about. Like, Slack wants access to the Jira API for this user who's using this app. And in order to do that, it will use OAuth. And then when it does use OAuth, the OAuth connection happens directly between the two apps. So cross-app access moves that connection to be negotiated by the IDP instead, which has a whole bunch of benefits, which we can talk about in a minute. But so that was the real origins of cross-app access, was like even just the simplest use case of these kind of link previews. And then you can imagine that there's a lot of things this would enable. And we kind of saw on the horizon that this AI trend was going to be coming, and didn't really expect it to like explode this quickly, this fast, but it has certainly played out that way, right? Where these, and MCP in particular is a perfect example of this. You have some AI tool that wants access to other enterprise apps, right? And that access to the other enterprise apps should happen under the control of the enterprise admin. So that's why it's a very natural fit for MCP.
I think one thing that's interesting is that, like, I think you mentioned like explosion and timelines being shifted. But when you started on this, like, what do you have any conception of how fast adoption would be? Where would it start? And how has that changed for you in the last few years, seeing, AI come in, MCPs come in? Like, how has timelines changed, and where are you seeing adoption right now, and what's it going?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we started this a number of years ago, and we started at Okta actually building out prototypes of this in order to kind of socialize the idea with other partners and, introduce it into the community. It was all very much done out in the open. Like, you can go find meeting minutes from OAuth meetings going back a couple of years now from when I was bringing that work there. As far as adoption goes, like, we always knew that there was going to be this inflection point of, we need like it's one thing for an IDP to support it like Okta, which obviously like some IDP has to support it in order for anybody to even care about this. Ideally, we would have other IDPs that will support it as well. Like, this is not supposed to be exclusive to Okta as an IDP by any means. But even if all the IDPs support it, it doesn't matter unless because there's three parties involved, right? Unlike other protocols where there's only two parties involved, like single sign-on is between an app and an IDP. And that means if an IDP supports it, an app can get value out of it by supporting it. Cross-app access is three parties. There's an IDP that's coordinating access between two other apps, which means you actually need two of the three parties to support it in order to kind of start the momentum. So just having one party support it isn't enough. And that's why, I've been working in, a number of different communities trying to plant these seeds over the last couple of years. And then finally in the MCP community, this is where it took off, right? And we saw Anthropic say, hey, we're on board with this. This is a good plan. We're going to build this into Claude and launch this beta program to actually try this out. And that meant that there's Okta as an IDP, there's Claude as one of the apps that wants to connect to MCP servers, and now any MCP server that shows up can test this out and actually like see it working in Claude and get value out of it immediately. So that's really what's starting momentum here.
Yeah, I think my perspective has been that's like the data silos used to exist in the past, right? Like, people wanted to say, I just need to connect to one app to get this thing working. And so people would do whatever work they need to do to get that one thing done. I think with AI agents, MCPs, and all these agentic tools, the kind of breaking down the data silos became increasingly important. And that's where doing it consistently across all the providers was critical. And that's, I think, maybe why XAA is, really taken off for a lot of people, because they don't want to solve the same problem 5 different times for 5 different customers.
That makes sense. And so maybe if I understand this right, Aaron, so if I was using Claude, and I think right now my experience is that I have to go in there and like click on authenticate my Google, authenticate my, say Linear, authenticate my Figma. And then what telling me is that maybe XAA is now removing that step from the end user. Does that sound right to you? How should the end user think about this actually, Derek?
Yeah, so there's two different personas that care about this. There's the enterprise admin, which is like the person configuring the Okta tenant, configuring all the apps that they're going to get rolled out to the enterprise. And then there's the employees of the company who are using this, right? So from the employee's perspective, essentially, they no longer see anything. Like, they log into Claude, and Claude is just already connected to all the MCP servers. So it completely removes the need for the employees to go one by one and say, connect Claude to Google, connect to Figma, connect to blah, 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 which is like a whole step of going through an OAuth redirect, seeing another login prompt, seeing a prompt that says, do you want to allow this app to share data? All of that friction, and then like having to do it possibly more than once a week because tokens expired or whatever, and things needed to get refreshed. So instead, you take that work that all the employees would have done individually and you make it happen like once by the admin setting it up ahead of time, and then the employees don't see anything anymore. They just log in and it's all already connected.
Well, this is really interesting because I think yesterday I was talking to a prospect, and they were like asking me, what if someone goes into that Claude Enterprise and they click authenticate to Google, but they select their personal Google by accident rather than their enterprise Google? Does this also help address that, or how does this flows work for that part of it too? Yeah,
it does. Yeah. So it's not the only thing that's going to solve the problem, but it's a huge it's the building block that solves the problem. So essentially, once Claude is using cross-app access to connect to these MCP servers, it no longer prompts the user for that OAuth screen. So there isn't even a way for a user to connect to the wrong thing, because it's all negotiated behind the scenes. So actually, from the Claude perspective, it does solve it completely from that angle. The opposite question is, can you connect a personal Claude account to a corporate like linear account or Slack account? And cross-app access doesn't by itself doesn't stop that from happening unless the app like linear changes the policy to only allow cross-app access connections to that server for that company, like for that org, which is a thing that they can do. But I believe in the current like beta program that everyone who's rolled it out, nobody's actually like gone that far to flip that switch yet. But they could, like once this is demonstrated that this is successful and working for everybody, they could then flip the switch and say, okay, well, for this customer's linear org, now that it's set up with cross-app access, we're going to stop OAuth connections that are done in a browser. So you actually can then completely solve this problem of you can prevent people from connecting personal accounts to like personal Claudes to corporate accounts, or corporate Claudes to personal apps.
Well, that's just really interesting, Daria. And Vijay, I know you've been working with a bunch of other third parties and looking at implementing this too. What's the experience there like right now? What have you seen? What's your point of view on?
Right, sure. So I think one thing that you got to give a lot of props to Aaron is getting all these people to agree on the spec. It's fairly quickly. It's been a lot of work just to make sure that they all agree on the spec. Everyone's super engaged. They're really trying to roll this out. They know how valuable it is to the entire ecosystem. And the documentation is very clear in many ways. So each, like you mentioned, there's like 3 different parties involved. And one thing that's nice about the documentation is like, hey, if you are the resource provider, this is what you do. If you're the requesting app, this is what you do. And it is, a 3-step negotiation process. And I think every team is figuring out their role in that whole ecosystem, and we're working well together to get it all done. So I think, yeah, it's just been nice to see that everyone just racing to get this done, because there's just so much value to be unlocked.
Yeah, and I think with talking about that, I'm thinking through like the end user experience, and that makes it like really smooth. How about the administrator, IT folks? Like some people on this call might be in IT looking at their managing the IDPs. How should they think about it? What should they be looking out for, concerned about? As they're thinking about, say, AI applications and MCPs, like what are some things do you think should be in their minds in there?
Yeah, so the goal here is to move this is to enable the IDP to be the control plane for what things are being connected, right? And that means that there's going to be some interface in the IDP to manage those connections. And this is going to be a product decision that every IDP that supports the spec will make. And it's going to show up differently in different IDPs that support the spec. What Okta's done over the last couple of months is one way that you can do it in an IDP, and essentially it works by, creating a representation of all the apps in the IDP for single sign-on and then establishing links between them. So you say like, as an admin, you would say like Claude is able to connect through cross-app access to Linear and to Slack, but not to this, right? And then you can imagine that you can eventually extend the that policy framework to actually do a lot more complicated things if you wanted to. And now I'm not talking about like what Okta's done currently, but just like theoretically, you could extend this into things like control which scopes an app would be able to be granted through cross-app access. Or you could say maybe do it by user groups. Like say for this group of users, they can connect this way, but you prevent other groups of users from connecting. Or you could set time limits, or there's a lot of things you can do. Think of all the tools that you would have in your IDP to manage a single sign-on and all the options you get in that. All of those options, the goal here is to extend all of those kinds of options to API access. Now, what Okta's done first is a very like minimal set of controls. It's basically, can this app connect or not? But you can imagine that other IDPs might make different decisions about how that works in their product, and Okta will likely also extend the control in the future to provide other options.
I think we had a question come in here, very relevant to this from Shafiq actually.
Mhm.
And it's asking about in this three-party type architecture, there's IDP, there's a AI system, there's MCP tools they're using. And I think the question here is where does the governance and controls of different layers of access lie in? So I think we're hearing about controlling and scoping client credentials. What kind of scopes, how far do the scopes go down to? Like, does it go down to like granular as tool-level, resource-level restrictions, down to like what the MCP can do, or is it like higher level on what scopes a user can do? How do we think? Like, how do these scopes translate into in the MCP world, say tool permissions and so on? Where does MCP gateways, MCP infrastructure vis-a-vis some of this XAA fit in? Maybe I'll let Vijay take this one on first, and then have Aaron chime in.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I think from our perspective, one thing that's really nice is the just central governance of it, right? The people making these decisions are the ones administering through the IDP to say, this is what I want control over. These are the user groups. I mean, the whole idea of SSO and SCIM, SCIM is meant to kind of provide a one-stop place to define all those things. And I think that's part of the nice part of this is being able to precisely control, like, this AI agent has access to these sets of tools, to these users, these groups. And I think they're kind of trying to do that manually today with, like, for example, if you don't use an MCP gateway, you're trying to control, these are the scopes that different users have. And you can see that in like Datadog's MCP has very fine-grained access to tools based off of the scopes he provided. But you're kind of relying on the OAuth protocol to do that. And so it's a kind of a nice centralized place to do all of that.
Yeah. So on the granularity topic here, again, we're thinking about, we've come at this from the OAuth perspective. Like, we didn't come at this from the MCP perspective. So we came at this from OAuth, and OAuth is based around issuing tokens. So ultimately what cross-app access does is it enables a authorization server to issue a token in a new way that's different from a redirect-based OAuth flow, and instead it's through a JOT authorization grant where the JOT is generated by the IDP. And after that token is issued, the client would then use the token to access the API, just like a regular OAuth token. And this was actually a very fundamental design decision of the spec itself, which was we didn't want to define a new token format. We didn't want to change the way you would already issue access tokens for your APIs. We wanted to slot very nicely into existing infrastructure. So what that means, though, is that it does not answer questions like limited to specific MCP tool calls or things like that. It's all just token based. So scope is part of it. Like, OAuth has the concept of scopes. MCP adopted the OAuth concept of scopes as well. There is discussions happening in the MCP community about how tools map to scopes and whether there should be more formal things around that. So we can discuss how that can get extended in the cross-app access spec in the future, but right now it's essentially it's based around the token issuance. So the IDP says, yes, this MCP server should issue a token for this client like Claude. But then the IDP is out of the picture. So the IDP is not in the middle of the actual tool calls. It does not have any visibility of the actual MCP traffic. It's all just based on token issuance, right?
Got it. So to make sure I understand this right, it's like, think of the XA IDP stuff as like, you have keys to the door, and then you can open the door and get through it now. But the granular things are what's going in and out of the house, the tool calls, what can you bring in and out? That is not in this spec right now. And if you want to get granular control and like, oh, I want agents to do X, Y, Z, but not ABC, and I can give you the keys to do it. But if you want those controls, then the MCP ecosystem infrastructure gateways become things that you might want to think of using over there. It's like, open the door, then now gate it a little bit and figure out what's going through the filter there.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the other sort of, to extend that analogy a little bit further, like you can decide there's multiple doors, and the doors are entrances to different things, right? And that would be like scopes, right? Where you could say, well, this door lets you go into this room, but not this room. And now you're going to issue 2 different keys from the IDP. So you can start breaking it up a little bit like that at the IDP layer. But again, to your point, like it doesn't see what's actually going through the door.
And maybe this is an interesting analogy. So it's almost like the IDP is like, I have a master key, and with the master key, I can go and mint per door keys, and I can go and all these doors now. And then I think you mentioned this term there, JAG. I've seen this happening around ID JAG or something. What does ID JAG stand for? It's like what is JAG in there?
Yeah. So JAG, JAG, that's the JOT authorization grant. It's a concept that's been around in OAuth for a very long time. I think it's relatively underused. This is probably one of the more bigger uses of it as a concept now, more concretely. But the idea is that so let me back up. JOT authorization grant. So why is it JOT authorization grant? There's also a thing just called authorization grant. And that's a kind of abstract concept of that a client is allowed to access something, right? That's what an authorization grant is. It means that this client is allowed to access this thing. And you can get an authorization grant, which would be an authorization code through the OAuth authorization code flow, which is part of the core OAuth spec. And in that case, the authorization code is a random string that is generated by the IDP when the user goes through a redirect flow. That represents an authorization grant to whatever the client requested and was granted by the user. So in like traditional OAuth, we have authorization grants that are usually done represented as authorization codes. And now we have a new kind of authorization grant, which is a JOT authorization grant. And a JOT JSON Web Token is a structured and signed token that represents this authorization. So what we're saying now is instead of the IDP saying that, or instead of the redirect-based OAuth flow issuing the authorization grant, the IDP is creating the grant itself, representing as a JOT, which is then presented to the authorization server to get an access token. So instead of issuing an access token from an authorization code, now the authorization server issues an access token from this JOT.
Got it. That makes sense in there. One day I will try to map it out and I get it there. Very familiar with those there. I do. One question from John has come up that's really interesting and from the webinar attendees here is, does XAA require any new features for the cloud providers that do IDP? So that's Okta. There's also like Entra, Azure, Google has its own IDP too. There's all this SAML and OIDC stuff out there. How if someone is not on Okta thinking about other cloud providers IDPs they use, how should you think about it, and what are those IDP providers doing today?
Yeah, so it is a new feature that is part of an IDP. So Okta now has this in beta, and other IDPs would need to add the feature in order to use it. So Entra would need to add this feature in order to support the protocol. There's if you want your IDP like Entra or Google Workspace to support it, please ask them as a customer, because they listen to customer feedback more than they listen to a random person on the internet like me. So I've had some conversations with folks there, but hearing it from customers is more powerful. So Ideally, yes, we do want other IDPs to support the spec. It's an open protocol. It's not an Okta feature exclusively. But it is a new thing that the IDP has to build. It's a new, there's likely going to be some new UI that the IDP has to create in order to give the admins the ability to manage these connections between things. And it's a new token to create that is this actual IDJAG token that is this authorization grant.
Makes sense there. And maybe going back to one question that I think I mentioned this earlier, like we've seen a lot of announcements and I see a lot of different terminologies, IDJAG, XAA. And then one thing in the MCP space is something called enterprise managed auth that has been in the spec now. Love to get a take, from both Vijay and Aaron, like both working in the space there, from the MCP and the IDP perspective. Is it the same thing? How's it different? How should we think EM, enterprise managed auth, in the context of, because MCPs are not just for Claude, right? It's like all AI systems. How should we think about AI rollouts and MCP with a spec in the ecosystem that enterprises are thinking about that? Mm-hmm.
Well, the short answer is that enterprise managed auth is the MCP spec name for cross-app access, which cross-app access itself is a nickname for the spec, which is identity assertion authorization grant, which is why it has a nickname. So enterprise managed auth is basically just the application of that IETF spec in the MCP spec, and it's mostly the same thing. It's just that there's a couple of requirements to do it, to use it for MCP that are not necessarily requirements for non-MCP, but it's really minimal. It's like, and this parameter is required instead of optional, something like that.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the MCP spec has to be extremely precise about all the details and maybe a little bit decoupled from the external standards when it can be. And in this case, it's just there's some requirements to make it make sense for the MCP protocol.
I have a question. Maybe Vijay can come in. So let's say I'm a company and I might be using Claude, and Claude has all this great setup with Okta and all. But what if I'm making my own internal chat systems and I'm making something and I want it to support IDJAG now? Like, what are some ways to get it to work? How should I connect to this application, connect them directly? Should I go through a gateway? Would that solve it for me? Like how should I think about some of the infrastructure layouts of deploying an AI system if I'm doing a bit more custom work on my end on this there?
Right. So, certainly because the protocol is this kind of three-party system, there are a lot of different parts to negotiate with the IDP, with the downstream providers. So certainly if you have a gateway or some intermediate provider that can help mediate all of that, kind of just takes away a lot of the pain. But the spec is also just very clear on the whole protocol, and a lot of the partners are providing a lot of tools to make it easy to integrate. So for example, a great partner we've been working with is WorkOS, and WorkOS makes it also easy to kind of do the dance between the IDP, do the exchange for the IDJAG token, and then the other part of it is, of course, the downstream providers. And it's as long as they support the protocol, it's just a pass this IDJAG token, get the basically the access token back, and then just use that as you would through the normal flow. So the one thing that's really nice from this perspective is a lot of the things that you have to do with the traditional kind of authorization grant flow is you got to manage refresh tokens. If you've dealt with the refresh tokens, you know how hard it is to make sure you're not dropping them. And there's this whole rotation process to make things secure. One of the things that's amazing about this is that most people don't have to worry about any of this anymore. So it simplifies the life of the individual just trying to get something working. But of course, it also simplifies folks like us that just can now use this protocol to make things a lot simpler. But I would say overall, the gateway makes it, you don't even think about it at all. You just connect through the gateway and it handles all the details. But the protocol itself is, fairly straightforward in the exchange of various tokens. And so that makes it pretty easy.
I've been asking a lot of questions. I wonder if Aaron and Vijay, you guys have questions for each other or thoughts that you want to share about all of this. Yeah.
I guess I can start a little bit. XAA is a very generic proposal. Clearly, you had these ideas before MCP becoming super popular. yeah, how has it been? Because like this rush of like MCP took over very quickly, right? Like within 3 months, it went from beginning to like everyone adopting it. How early were you to the MCP ecosystem when you saw it first drop? Did you immediately get involved, or did you kind of like test the waters and see how things were going? Like, I'd love to know your role in it.
Yeah, yeah. I remember March last year. I remember hearing suddenly everybody was talking about MCP, and I had no idea what it was. I had never heard of it before. I think the first draft of it was like the November, December before that,
Yeah,
right?
2024. Yeah.
So it was a few months, and I had not heard of it whatsoever. And then finally in March, I was actually at the IETF meeting, and I remember just every conversation was somebody mentioning, "Have you heard of this new thing? Like, I think it's gonna be really important." And I was like, "Oh boy, what do I have to learn now?" Um, and so that was when I like first started getting introduced to it, and read through the spec. I saw that they had made some, decisions about how their authorization was going to work in the March version, and they had chosen to start with OAuth 2.1 as a baseline, which was a great sign, that there were people thinking about things the right way, of like not starting from scratch and creating a whole new authorization protocol for MCP, but adopting a solid foundation. There were a couple of things that were not quite right of how the first draft adopted OAuth. So that was when I was like, okay, well, I see the goal here, I see the intent. Now I at least have a somewhat of an understanding of what MCP is supposed to be doing. I'm by no means an expert in the actual MCP protocol itself. Like, I'm very much on the authorization layer only. But I could see at least like the vision there, and started chatting with the folks around March and April, and that's when I started getting really involved. And um, by the June update, we had kind of teased out a lot of the awkward bits of OAuth to make it work with a lot more existing OAuth infrastructure. So that was my real goal there, was because people have a lot of deployed OAuth infrastructure, and there's a lot of OAuth authorization server companies, whether that's Auth0, Stitch, WorkOS, whatever. I want to make sure that when someone's rolling out an MCP server, they can leverage those existing companies' products, and that all these companies aren't going to have to like recreate everything just for MCP, right?
And do it differently.
So yeah, yeah. And I think that worked. And because of that, it was then a very natural extension to adopt the cross-app access pattern for MCP, because all the building blocks were already in place.
Makes sense. I think kind of related to that, I also know that you're one of the creators of the SIMD spec,
Yep.
which I think you only announced in, was it October last year? Or maybe a little
Not
later?
exactly.
Okay,
Not exactly. Yeah. So in October, it was adopted by the OAuth working group, and
got it.
adoption is a very significant step. It's the first time it's like official in any way. Before adoption, a spec is just some person on the internet has an idea, and anybody can publish documents to ietf.org. They're individual drafts, and they have no official standing until they're adopted by a working group, and then they are a working group document. And adoption is not the last step at all. Like, drafts can change a lot from adoption to finally getting published as an RFC, but it is a very important step. So yes, October was a very important step for CIMD. This is the thing that lets clients bring their own identity into an OAuth system. But I have been working for actually many, many years on that foundation, and I actually tried to bring it to the OAuth working group before. Um, didn't get a lot of traction. This was maybe 8 or 9 years ago.
Wow.
Didn't get a lot of traction. And then finally, again, it's not a thing that's unique to MCP, but MCP is certainly requires this kind of solution to a problem. So that was enough of a motivation that suddenly, like, a lot more people understood the problem that this solves. Because before MCP, a lot of people didn't understand the problem it was solved, and it was just like, well, I don't have this problem, so why is it interesting? So that was, again, like, that was kind of the MCP contribution to that part of the spec, was like, now there's a lot more attention paid to like the reason that this concept exists.
Right, and I think that echoes exactly like the XAA, SIMD are general solutions, but MCP really brought them to the forefront. And yeah, I think it's been very, very timely for you to be involved in all that.
We had a few more questions that you come up in the Q&A that I think I would like to get to as well. So there's a few, so we have a bit of time, so let's answer some of them. I'll start with the one that got top votes in there actually, which is a question about authentication proves who, or authorization defines what's possible. So one of the questions that came up was, how do we define whether a specific AI action should execute right now? How does runtime decision evaluation become a control layer as agents gain more autonomy? And how should enterprises evaluate if an action the agent is taking is justified under different contexts working it? I wonder if both of you have a point of view on this. Yeah.
Let me try.
Do you want to start with that one?
I'm trying to find the question. Give me a quick second.
Oh no.
Oh, I see. Okay. The layer above identity authorization. So I guess this is maybe talking about like non-human identities, maybe, or is that something different?
I'm thinking about the things like I think we talked a lot about how someone can get access to things that run, but I think now people are worried about it's my take on this, like if AI can do all these actions, what if a risky action is in scope? So for example, I could get a token in which let's say I connect to, I don't know, say Figma or Canva, which I think are partners or Datadog, and one of the permissions in my token scope is going to be delete a bunch of records because I can do it if I went to the interface. It's in my user scope. When I get the ID jet thing, it probably will be there because I'm like, oh, just your user scopes, here we go. But then I may not want my agent to be doing these things. Some things I want my agent to do, not do, and it may be context dependent. It may be the context of what's it doing, the workflow state, the current risk conditions, is it in the weekend or weekday, something like that, right? How should we even think about this in this new world of things?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different answers to that. So like ultimately the resource that's being accessed, or the system that's being accessed to, like in your example, delete a bunch of records, that is the ultimate enforcement point of that decision, right? So it needs context to know if that's okay. And that context can come from different places, and probably should come from different places. So there might be a policy internally to it that says, well, we're not going to allow any agents to do bulk operations like this, and we are going to always bring a human into the loop. Side note, there's a lot of conversations now going on in the standards groups about how to bring humans in the loop of things like that. And there's different specs, different in progress discussions about like what's the right answer for that. So keep an eye out on solutions there. Some of that's in the MCP community, some of that's happening in IETF. But then you could imagine that you might also want to define those policies in a gateway layer or in the IDP as the place where you've pre-established those policies, not necessarily doing it at just on the fly. So there's a lot of different ways that you might want to do it for different reasons. So like for me, the goal is to make sure that all of the different options that people want to deploy for this are possible, and we have the tools and the specs to move the data around to make it all possible, right?
Yeah, I that's a great answer. I think my perspective is I kind of break into two different levels. One is I think of static definitions and dynamic definitions. So a lot of the standards talk about, you have this scope, it allows you to do these things. That's kind of like a static definition. And then you can also layer on top of that what our perspective is, what we consider role-based access to different tools. So you say, I have a use case that's like, I only want to read from this place and write to this other place. And the scopes from the underlying provider may actually give you more access just because that's how they've decided to give it to you. But at the gateway or IDP layer, you can define a specific role above that that says, for this use case, it's only going to read from this and write to that, and you can kind of statically control that. And that does require configuration, but once you get it right, you kind of get guardrails on exactly what it can and can't do. Where it gets a little trickier, and I think we're still trying to figure it out, is the dynamic nature, which is like you might want to give access to read and write to a bunch of things, but then depending on what it has done in the current session, what data it's read, you might want to dynamically scope things down. I think we're all still trying to figure out exactly the right solutions there, but I think the static one gets you really far today, and I think we're all working on the dynamic sides in the future.
That's really interesting. I think as agents have to work on horizons of hours and not days, then the dynamic stuff usually becomes really interesting to think about, because that becomes a big risk there. Had a few more questions come in that I think will be interesting to get to. So Reed is a customer of Okta. So he's maybe the Okta question here is like, hey, from the Okta admin perspective, what does admin need to do? Like, does admin in Okta itself need to enable, authorize these apps for the end users? Are these features available today? Is there any like additional things they need to purchase to get to use them? What is that like from the Okta perspective?
Yeah. So right now, this is actually all part of the beta program that Anthropic is running. So if you are a Okta customer and a Claude customer, you can go to the Claude blog, find the announcement about it there. There's a link to apply as a customer of both to get access to this. So it's currently just in that beta program. It'll be rolled out more broadly to everybody soon. I don't want to give dates on this right now, but you can find the Okta announcements about that for the dates. And as far as what it looks like inside, because it's in beta, it very well might change. But essentially, the high level of it is you have your representation of Claude because it's already configured for single sign-on. You have your apps like Linear and Figma and Slack or whatever already set up in your org because you already use them and you have user single sign-on. And then you go in and you create configuration that says Claude is able to request data through cross-app access from Linear and from Figma and from Slack and from these apps. And so you create those as policies in the dashboard. And then you have to configure it on those MCP servers as well to like enable it there. And there's a few steps to set this all up, but then once it's all set up, it's extremely seamless. And it's like almost unnerving how invisible it is as an end user. It's like, it's wild that you just don't see anything happen anymore.
Cool. And I think if you're on the Mint platform using Mint with Claude, do reach out. We are also partnering with Okta and Claude to make all of that seamless too. Yeah, so let us know if there's something that you like to get enabled on your team as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so I think we're just about at time. So maybe I would end with just one question to both of you guys here. What's next? What are you most excited about in the next 6 months for XAA, auth, and all of this area? Yeah.
I mean, I think from my perspective, we care a lot about user experience, and so that's this kind of invisible nature of authorization is kind of the magical experience we want to deliver to our customers. And so we're really trying to push ahead to make sure that as much as possible, all the other downstream MCP providers support this, because it's just a much better protocol, much better experience. And for administrators, gives them the control they really want because they have to do it in the one place that they trust. And so I think we're just looking forward to just rolling it out as much as possible. And yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, same. I'm really excited to see all this progress happening on it. And right now, again, this is like, it's exciting to see all this momentum, but it is still pretty early days for it. So I'm really looking forward to this being more like as a GA feature in all these MCP servers and in Okta, so that even more people can actually test it out and build and experience it. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting couple of months ahead of getting this rolled out to more. But if you are interested in building this out in your MCP server or your clients, we can actually try this in an Okta org right now. If you just go sign up for an integrator org, which is our like free. It's not a trial. It's like it's for builders who are building apps. You can get an integrator org, and then the feature is available right now to actually go and test out. So I would love to see more MCP servers, support this very soon. So I'm always happy to help and happy to talk about that. And again, there's a lot of conversations happening in the IETF around this and related things with agents right now. It's amazing how fast this is moving. So if you are encountering, any edge cases or pushing the boundaries of what's been currently defined, I want to have those conversations too. And I want to have those conversations in the MCP community groups and in the IETF and the OAuth working group. So be excited to talk to everybody there as well.
All right. Thank you both, Vijay and Aaron, for joining us. And thank you everyone on the webinar attendee list. Great live questions. And we hope to see you next time on a series of all things agents and MCPs. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.